In an exciting video today, I'll be walking you through our own differentiation and distinction, demarcation of friends and enemies in the current age. And to do this can be the part one, because this is not the full panoply of offerings that society produces for us to distinguish. But nevertheless, I will walk you through the ones pictured here, so whether you can think of them as your friend, enemy, and how we go about differentiating them into their categories. And from this, I think we can get a fair grasp of the political landscape. How many of some brands, some sets of people there are versus how many of the other. Now, the friend here is obviously the winner. So you see the word friend, you could just associate it with me and my types, the winners. And the enemy, the frail loser types. And so we'll distinguish in those categories. Now, starting off, we'll go left to right just for ease of access. I think it's very familiar face here, but what is representing is the tech bro, and in brackets we can put incel, because the idea that Elon Musk has had sex is probably foreign to many of you, in the idea that he's had lots of children through, if you said in vitro insemination, artificial insemination, then you would probably say that makes sense. So he is definitely in the friend category, a man who does not always toe the line, maybe as we wish, but the tech bro in his core, he's really, pro Faustian destiny. I mean, that's the core essence to what this question solves, really. Just to say, can we trust the guy who's really good at technology and not good at having sex with women to be on our side? And yes, we can, because in war, you want the smart engineers who are willing to take those steps to create the bombs. And the next category we have, another funny one, because we can always classify or disclaim these categories in separate ways, is the nerd. And now the nerd is a funny one because there's some extremely right-wing nerds who admonish any attempt to wokeify or basically inject that cultural Marxism, communism into their hobby. In this instance, we'll pick Magic the Gathering players who you could say, cross between being fat layabout good for nothings and fat layabout good for somethings, because the idea that the hobby space is encircled by the fixation on something like combinatronics, which we do like. Combinatronics is our friend. So we try to harness that in the world, in the realm of reality, in the best ways possible. So we're going to put this one here, although there will be a disclaimer or a caveat that if this was a fat nerdy loser, you'd go in the bottom end, but a fat nerdy winner, we'll take that one. Okay, second one, third one. Third one is Antifa. Antifa is comprised of basically as many weaklings and disenfranchised weirdos as humanly possible to recreate out of some hellscape kaleidoscope. Now, the idea that these people are good at anything is not true. Can't organize, can't fight, can't support, can't run a 200, 300 meter sprint, can't lift, if functionally can't hold jobs. In almost every way, they're deleterious to society, and they hate us. So, very easy one, obviously. And the second one, or the fourth one here. Now, the second time the tech bro comes, this is a tech bro, but the distinguishing factor here is the schizo part. Now, schizos, by their very nature, are hard to cage. We don't want to necessarily categorize them as such. But think about historically, almost every schizo has been a Faustian. And so that means the schizo is our friend. Now, it's very important to note that most of the most successful Faustian men have been some grade of schizo. It takes a wacko, eccentric man to try to do things that are thought impossible. Thus, we will keep our tech-inclined schizos as the friends. They're on the team. The next one here is the gym bro, very clearly and easily distinguished between the roid tranny, which you see here. So we don't want roid trannies. Roid trannies are men who are ill-equipped to actually be proper men, and so require injections to be men, thus imbalancing their hormone profiles, which gives them very skewed moral profiling, and as such, they consider anyone who's on their team to be anyone who gives them money. Grifters, usually roid trannies. There's a whole category around this, and you can see on YouTube plenty of roid trannies and how they go about their business. It's rather neurotic, embarrassing, and I would say in general is disinclined to generate much support and garner much encouragement from the right, because you can very clearly see this is an imposter and someone who was not born like this but has to manufacture themselves in that way, and not in any cool way. It's always pathetic. Academics, they're always the enemy. Academics, I think, maybe at one time in, say, the 1700s, had the right idea, and then the vestige of that carried through to something like phrenology or eugenics, where we had this idea that science can actually explain social ramifications in ways that make sense to us. We can measure your skull and therefore tell you what type of person you are, your own disposition. We can say that the healthy should breed in a way that makes more healthy kids rather than more, you could say, malformed freaks, which we didn't get. So the academic has lost its ability to ally with us. It's in an institution, necessarily so, which requires them to behave in a certain way and or encourages certain profiles to become an academic. You have to be obedient like a dog. You have to scrounge for funding from the taxpayer, basically. Sometimes NGOs and things like that will throw scholarships or whatever it is your way for your research, which is embarrassing and a farce and not worth the paper it's printed on, etc., etc. So an academic, and if you're in universities at the moment, none of these people are your friends. They're either there for a paycheck, which is an embarrassing sector to actually receive paychecks from because it's so abysmally low. If you had the same qualifications and you were actually good at your job, you would work in the private sector because you would be paid more. So they're not good at real jobs. They're, you could say, aggrandized teachers, like primary school teachers. So like add 10 IQ points to a primary school teacher and you get a high school teacher, and once again add 10 more points so you get to 110 and you've got a university professor. This is what we're dealing with here. And there are specialists in the academic sector which maybe are exceptions to the rule, thus proving the rule exists. But in general, by and large, 95% of these academics are complete freaky losers. So they're in the enemy category. Another tech bro here, and this is the simp. Now the simp is very easily identified as someone who wishes they had more pussy and thus is trying to ingratiate themselves with the softer sex in ways that we find disgusting, and particularly because not that putting a woman on a pedestal is necessarily a bad thing, it's the modus operandi around how they do it. And the reason OnlyFans exists is because there's too much disposable income from guys who are B tier, C tier at their jobs, which means they earn quite a good wage but have no outlet to spend it on. Take up Magic the Gathering, become a winner, take a hobby, something like this, hit the gym. Maybe you'll find it be different, but you can see here we're starting to gather quite a portfolio of losers and once again corresponding portfolio of winners. Hegel, he's on our team, and you would think, no, all the Hegelians, no. Listen, Hegel, first of all, as a person, is on the winning team. He hated all of the third worlders, Federhin nonsense. He spawned Marx because Marx is bad at reading, that's all. And you can see that young Hegelians had a fair idea, but young Hegelians also had Stirner, which rebuked basically the entire faction of Marxism in one go in the 1800s. So it's very clear to see that Hegel was on the team. He was one of the winners. The fairly generic left liberal, clearly a loser, is reaching out and shrieking against a reality she or he finds reprehensible to their inability to win. How has the playing field become like this, and I can't see myself winning in it? Then I must either become the referee so I can destabilize the game. I must be an audience and a spectator who storms onto the pitch to disrupt the game, and or I'm going to see if I can break the rules of the game to see if I can formulate a way to win by cheating. These are the ideas around why people like this are the freak side of the coin, the enemy side, is because they have no notion of honor and duty, and something that would be upstanding and noble and beautiful to them is almost the reverse for how they perceive it, because it reminds them of their own ugliness. This is why the purple-haired liberal here, represented by this person, is always an enemy. Bureaucrats, European bureaucrats in particular, probably the harshest of the enemies, particularly because their concern is for a very pathetic amount of power, which would embarrass anyone who's held true power in the way that they'll clasp onto it with this death grip. You are some nameless bureaucrat in an institution which provides almost nothing, institutes pathetic policy, social situation, economic policies, and in general is nothing to be bragging about. You get to go to conferences where everyone wanks themselves off in some sort of circle jerk. This is not power or status or what you think you're doing here. God knows. So this woman LARPing as a politician is the preeminent version of the bureaucrat as a civil servant. Not your friend, definitely the enemy. North FC, this is probably the most annoying one because the bread and circuses is culminated in the working class, and the working class is a disposition, not necessarily working as a class, but in someone who up here is always going to be in that slave mentality. You need to entertain me, you need to provide me bread and circuses. This person is swayed both ways by various mechanisms. The enemies have been very good at understanding this. So I need Ngubu to be on my football team so that we win, even though he's raping my daughters. This is the type of mentality we're dealing with the football fan just here as portrayed, but in general, a wider caricature or parody of that layer of society, which is big on sports, big on gambling, big on cars. This idea around entertaining yourself with frivolous activities resides in a slave mentality, and in doing so, cultures a person who is swayed very easily by messaging propaganda. So it does work when it works, and they can become friends. This is how you get an army, for instance, or a modern police force which enforces your own rules, martial law enforced by soldiers, etc. But at the moment, they reside with the enemy. These people are not your friends, and they may be your neighbors, and you can maybe see a glimpse or a glint of the promise that they can be swayed to our side. You just need to be racist enough, you just need to be bigoted enough, you need to be xenophobic, and you'll see the division here that is drawn by these people because they end up alienating what is the more normie tier centrists. And centrists is truly in the between the friend and enemy distinction. So in the extremists, there will be a decision that has to be made by these people. You'd be on a team of winners, and this is what winning looks like, or you'd be on the team of the freaks and losers, and that's what that looks like. Freaks and losers can still win. Even though obviously it sounds ironic that a loser can be a winner. It's the way that you approach the game in sense of even when you win, you're a loser. Nothing will remove that fact about you. The most noble winners can still lose, but they're never in here. Not the Ubermensch. Farmers, they are not your friends. Farmers have had a particularly positive reputation historically because of what they did represent. This man employs thousands of Mexicans or backpackers or Indians or any number of people. Now, a farmer in particular can be very friend based on that way in that zone because they have the idea that their tribe is what's the most important, that they're most Faustian, and the way that they try to ensure that there's adequate food supplies and all that sort of stuff for their people. Very admirable. The farmer as a representative has been nothing but trouble for Western society for the last 100 years. They have done nothing but demand and demand and demand at the expense of basically everyone else, to the end that most societies like Germany, France, could be an autarky when it comes to food production, but they're not, because there's a requirement around profit maximization from a farmer. I need subsidies, I need this, I need that, to then also manipulate market prices on certain goods. This person is no longer your friend. But capitalism has basically destroyed the nobility of the farmer in many, many ways. Once again, there are very friendly farmers who are based on our side of the coin. But in general, the farmer as a representative is over here. They go, no, there was tractors that were driven into the Amsterdam Parliament. They only care when it affects them. How is that an ally? That's someone who's self-interested. Why were they driving tractors when there's huge amounts of Moroccans raping women in the Netherlands? Yeah, exactly. Silence. So who are they really for? They're for themselves. Okay, great. So how is that useful? Oh, well, they're a convenient weapon to wield sometimes. Great. Okay. Well, until you're established as a friend forever, in perpetuity, and an alliance is forged, then you stay on that side. Baristas, category, service workers, these people are never going to be won over because their appeal is good times. It's sort of like the millennial and Gen Z version of the North SC, which is a boomer and Gen X tier representation, like a caricature archetype. The barista type is someone who at some point in time worked at a cafe or a bar and has a disposition around everyone should just be friendly and mates, and colloquialisms are abounding, and there's a bunch of insouciance and once again, good times, c'est la vie, this sort of disposition where, just be nice to them. Just, all these African migrants who are raping, but if we were just giving them more stuff, maybe that would assuage them. Maybe something we can solve with just more free things that I don't actually know how to pay for. Yeah. And that's why they're renting until they're 45, because they don't understand basic economics, they don't understand basic social policy, etc. The last one is an educated woman. And this actually is an interesting part. It's almost like the bell curve of like the most educated and least educated women are always going to be your enemy. It is the case that a very uneducated woman is going to be hanging around the enemy all the time, basically. They're going to be dating foreigners. They're going to be associating themselves in those circles in those ways. I know I go to school with a bunch of Pakistanis. They're just nice girls who wear burqas. Isn't that funny? Female oppression is hilarious. And so this is the irony, obviously, once again. And so this goes all the way to the other side of the very educated women who are pro-Islam for some strange reason, even though Islam hates women. And if you ask them if they hate women, they're actually feminists. But they've sided on the side of the women haters. It's very peculiar. And I know that's not a new founding. I just am still aghast or flabbergasted by the fact that that is a cognitive dissonance which exists. How is it that you just don't think about it like that? That you associate the poor brown person with your white guilt, or your ability to bleeding heart on your sleeve, versus the idea that they would rape you and enslave you if you were born in their country of origin. It's very strange to me. But in general, this is the Western white woman, heavily educated, terrible at politics, bad at understanding history, has no concern for actual social dynamics, but is, as with most people on this list and women in general, very much concerned with appearing to be on the good side, because that idea around sticking out, the poppy that grows the tallest, will get its head lopped off, and in doing so become a social pariah and an outcast, which is the most egregious and grievous thing that a woman can think of. And it is for them something that's a non-starter, a non-negotiable. They need to be in a space where it's fine to believe a certain thing. Once again, no one has faults with women as a sex and gender in that way. I think that's completely fine. If your gender conforms like that, then you embrace that conformity. But then I don't think you need to be as outspoken and interested in politics as you need to become across, because at some point that pendulum will swing back and you start to look like Emma Watson, who was super pro trannies, and now that no one likes trannies anymore, is coming across as just noxious and rather unsettling, because J.K. Rowling, who took a very hard stance against trannies for very reasonable reasons, once again, not sure why women are bothering with politics in this way. I can understand J.K. Rowling's position that we want to defend women, but she was also pro-Islam, so once again, I'm not really sure the cognitive dissonance allows for a complete understanding of him. But in general, that male men, men in general trying to invade women's spaces is legitimate. They've always tried to do that. The creepy, perverted men who are negatively horny and gooners, and obviously you can put gooners and all those other types down here. I won't bother because we already associate those people with this enemy section, and as you can see, there's very few friends. Now, what are we missing? Well, we're missing almost every single man born before 1914 that's not an English liberal. So historically, it's been a rather large group, and that's why Empires and the Manifest Destiny was so successful. Unfortunately, when you're introducing more and more of the enemies, and obviously not sure, this is only exclusively the Gothic man's enemy internally. So this is our enemies as the Gothic. This is the Civil War. If you had an internecine war between white people, this is what it would look like. Down here in the enemy section is obviously hordes and hordes of third worlders, brown people of any sort and colour and creed. The idea then that democracy works is a farce. It's fatuous, because a friend, when there's one out of every 100, is never going to win a battle on numbers statistically. It's impossible. So you have to have a collective amount of might that's being able to... Now, luckily, we are at 10x's, 100x, or whatever magnitude it is. Is engineering, they say there's like a 100x engineer or something. This is what it's like for a male who's the friend on this side here, the powerful Faustian Gothic man, who's ensouled with the infinite will to power and technics, is that there is a 10x. But what's required is that there's a banding together of these men in that way, and behind typically a leader and a Caesar. You need to be able to transmogrify a very disparate group into a singular, into a monolith. And that'll defeat any type of mishmash here, which you can see. And once again, to win over the normie tiers and the normgroids into this friend zone. So that's it. That's the first part of the episode. I'm always happy to walk through more archetypes and where they fit in this distinction. But hopefully that's elucidating and enlightening to you on the topic of who's my friend and who's my enemy.